And we got a lot to cover. I also want to make a note in here somewhere so I don't forget to talk about survey results from the AZFRN broadly and how we should go about sharing those with you all. So let me just make a note of that so I don't lose it. Okay, but if you remember last week, we ended on that dues conversation, and of course, 3 minutes is not enough time to talk about that. So let's dive back into that. And Claire, I will let you kick us off because I know you had some things to share about sort of PCA's long-term vision and what we kind of see as being our role with or without FTF moving forward.
Yeah, thank you, Michelle. And maybe maybe my first thing would be a question to you, Katie and Marcella. Do you have any reflections or questions to kick off the conversation about dues? Because the way that we left off, I remember was, dues were really put into place for sustainability's sake. And because there was this concern that sustainability was going to be a really big issue, and that the only way, or perhaps one of the only ways that you could continue getting funding for the network would be dues. So do you have any questions before I talk some more on that conversation?
I mean, I don't think so. I think it's just one of those like ongoing topics that I'm glad we're going to be talking more about, because I think figuring out, what that really looks like long term is going to be really valuable.
Okay. And anything from you, Marcella?
I mean, I think I would echo Katie, like, what is the long-term plan and goal, right? I heard you say there are a number of other agencies who could fund, but what does that look like in true concrete? It's written and there's the sustainability piece to it.
Yeah, absolutely fair. Okay, so a couple of things. What I propose that we do, starting where we are, is with the results of the survey that Molly and Michelle have put out to the AZFRN members, as well as the interviews that they did with FRAC members, we would like to use that as a foundation for answering the following question, which is, what kind of work does the AZFRN want to do moving forward? And then determining what kind of support is actually needed for that work. Because I'm actually not sure if there is, like, if there's a budget that you want to meet with the amount of funding that you're looking to raise for sustainability, or have discussions happened about that? Because it seems like there was a decision made to have dues so that there could be a pot of money to be spent, but do we know what the money would be spent for? Have any conversations happened in terms of what is the amount that is needed to move the network forward? Has that been discussed?
Well, I was looking to see if I had a presentation on it. Unfortunately, I think being without our treasurer currently is a little bit of a challenge in that way, because I'm not sure. I don't know, Marcella, if she gave you documents that they had, but we did have a presentation on it with kind of here's what we had traditionally spent. I know, like, a piece of it, I think, is that the idea was to continue to have somebody be like the facilitating body, for lack of a better way of saying it, to help with the administrative pieces that, none of us really have the capacity to manage on an ongoing basis. And then part of it was for professional development. And I'm trying to remember if there were other specific categories called out in it, but I don't know. If I can find it, I'll share it.
Cool. Okay. That's good context. So so to continue what I was saying, I think that there are a lot of organizations and philanthropies that would be interested in funding the work of this network. Now, I can't say with absolute total 100% certainty because we haven't asked them yet, but there is now a lot of momentum and attention on FRCs by state leaders. For example, FRCs are called out as part of the DCS strategic plan, particularly for prevention. So how do they prevent people from even touching their system? They're thinking FRCs, because of their ability to connect families to resources and to provide those supports upstream before DCS is ever needed, they're really turning their attention there. So I think because of that attention, this is my personal opinion, dues may not be the best way to get you the funding that you need. Whether that is for hiring someone, either a staff member or a consultant to facilitate these meetings and to keep everything on track, and essentially to project manage this and to administer the website and invest in professional development opportunities. And even if we do get dues from everyone that's currently a network member, they'll probably raise about $10,000 if everyone pays so far. And maybe my calculations are off. That was like on the back of the napkin. So I guess what I'll say is Prevent Child Abuse Arizona, even though we obviously have just come in and like met you as the contracted facilitator for this work. And I want to fully acknowledge that you didn't pick us. Like the awkwardness of, I think, the way that this state is set up in terms of an FRC network is that the FRC network doesn't pick the person that supports them. It is a funder. So we understand that kind of dynamic, but we are in it for the long term, even if we're not the facilitator or even if we're not paid by First Things First. In our years of identifying strategies that prevent child abuse and neglect, family resource centers keep on coming up as the way to get family support because of the things that you do. And that's parent education, that's connecting families to each other, that's resource referral. We need in this state a system that supports families, and that's not well connected in this state. So our vision is to create a statewide family support system. And that's what our focus is going to be for our organization. So supporting you is part of our long-term plan and mission. So that said, we're in it, we're all in. Yes, we're being paid right now to support you, but even if we're not in the future, we want to be of support. We want to connect you with professional development opportunities. We want to help. We want to help you raise money. We want to make sure that this network is well connected, because I think if we think about this big vision of creating a statewide family support system where all families get what they need, that means that a family resource network needs to be supported. So in case that deserves to be said, what I'm trying to say kind of in short is we can help you raise money without needing to have dues. And I'm personally afraid that trying to charge dues, especially when people are not required to join the network anymore, is actually going to shoot us in the foot, because less people are going to be able to participate in the things that you want them to participate in. But I want to respect the decisions of this body, because we're here to collaborate with you, not to control you. Any thoughts on that?
I mean, Claire, I think initial thoughts, and me myself personally, I completely see where, I see both sides of it, right? But I would also, how do we ensure that happens, right? Like, let's say you win the lottery, right? Like, how do we ensure that this funding, like, that's true sustainability, right? Because I think that's, the good intentions are always there, but like how, and I think that's part of the dues, right? That's not just good intentions, it's that it's, but I completely hear what you're saying on the other side, where it can limit us, right? Where things did change about it. So both sides of that end. And I think that's I don't know, I was just thinking like, what does that agreement look like? How is there something in writing where we can, what does that ensure, like regarding partners and agencies that were willing to fund fund us? So I don't know, just initial thoughts.
Thanks.
Yeah, I did find presentation that was done by our former treasurer, Betsy. And the information that's in here, and I'm not sure exactly where she got it from because there was a sustainability committee that pulled it together. So, and I wasn't a part of those specific conversations, but basically said that the bare bones operational budget that we would need to kind of continue what we were already doing was about $15,000 a year in professional development costs, and that was what the facilitators like scheduled and paid for on the behalf of the network. And then I guess that's all. That's all it says is the bare bone operations status is 15,000 for 6 professional development opportunities per year. And then that didn't include the cost of the meeting facilitation for the network, strategic planning, events, marketing, internal communication, all of those pieces. They projected based on the membership at the time this was written that we would bring in about 21,000 in dues.
Okay.
And then their goal was to kind of have multiple ways to ensure sustainability. So if dues were around 20,000, then grants, then possible pay for service opportunities. Like if we did PD, that people that weren't engaged with the network were invited to participate in, charging for that for them, but not for members and friends. And then potential fundraising and sponsorships from other sources available. So, and part of that really, like the professional development piece is the big one that members have said is really important to them. And a piece of that is because we're required by First Things First, those of us that are funded by them, to have a certain number, I think it's 18 hours of professional development that each staff member must have. So I think part of the idea with dues was that, that stuff is usually not free. And so that way the network and the facilitators for the network could have access to those funds to help pay the costs for those professional development opportunities rather than each agency kind of doing it on their own. So, but yeah, I think that's basically what the idea was that it would raise around $20,000 a year to just help with the sustainability piece.
Okay. Yeah.
I think it would be great if we have multiple sources. It is really hard for me to get a read on how our membership truly feels about the due structure. And part of that is because of all the change that happened with it no longer being specifically required by First Things First. So like, again, when we went through this process and asked people to vote on it, they were required to be a member, right? And now they're not required to be a member specifically of this network. And so we haven't really gone back and revisited whether that changes people's feelings on it. We haven't really talked about like what that looks like if people just say, well, I'm not going to pay it, so I'm not going to participate. Like we haven't had those conversations, I think just because the timing has been kind of difficult with everything that's happened.
Yes.
So
yeah.
So I think it's definitely worth having the conversations about. And I don't know if there's anybody who feels really strongly that dues are like 100% have to be something we continue with. I'm not really sure what the feeling is on that, honestly.
Okay.
I think I agree. Pardon me, excuse me. Hi everyone. Apologize for my tardiness. When we were all required to be in the FRN, it was just something that you had to do. So of course we all budgeted for it. But not all of us maybe have a large grant or a pool of money to pull from. I just know for me it's important because of the 6, soon to be 8 staff that I'll have, and the PD portion of it is really important. And I know I talked about that on my one-on-one meeting. I reiterated that quite a bit. But it's coming from the network. It's already vetted. It's already approved. It already, is applicable to the staff. So we were already under the impression that we had to budget for it, so we did. But I completely agree. If it's not a requirement anymore, I don't know if people would find another use for that money, I think. But it's very positive, Claire, to hear you say that, there is funding out there and available and people that want to support what we do. But just finding those people, I guess,
Yeah.
is a little bit unnerving, but I think that's it. Just we all do great work, and just finding those key connections and those people.
And I think to your point, Melissa, on doing great work, I don't know if any of you have the capacity to do things like grant write for the AZFRN within your own jobs, right? So that's probably something that you would expect the supporting person for you to do for you with you. I think it may have been just a factor of not being in front of the right people in the past. I think that one of the reasons why Prevent Child Abuse Arizona was selected as the vendor to do this is because we have a lot of connections with state agencies. We are a state vendor for meeting and conference planning. So we often get funds from DCS, from ADHS, from Access, from different state agencies, and they can give us training funds to put on conferences. And our whole network of people that we serve are people who serve families. So many Family Resource Center staff have attended our professional development offerings. It's kind of what we do. So for professional development, I don't want to seem arrogant, but we have a lot of different opportunities that we could tap into just based on what we have. So what I would offer is even, well, the AZFRN doesn't perhaps necessarily have to create its own professional development opportunities just for its network. There could be other opportunities that you tap into that we are connected to just by virtue of putting them on. Another question I have is, if you do charge dues, would you not admit people into the meetings if they did not pay dues? If like their organization has not paid dues, would they not be able to attend meetings or professional development because they're not members?
Yeah, I mean, I think that was the idea being that, so the idea, and again, without having it totally in front of me, I apologize, I don't remember all the specific details. But the idea was that members could have essentially an unlimited list of staff that were able to attend the AZFRN meetings and the professional development without any kind of like additional cost for anything. Friends would have a limited number, and if you weren't a member or a friend and you wanted to come to professional development, then we could charge for that, for the professional development opportunities, but they wouldn't be invited to come to the AZFRN meetings unless they were invited to come to it like as a speaker or presenter about a topic. And then they would have to go through the process of requesting to be a speaker at the meeting and us kind of reviewing and making sure that the topic being covered was something that we were looking for.
Yeah, I love it.
Which I know seems kind of, and I mean, I know we've talked about this before, but I've always been a little bit like, it's such a like double-edged thing, right? Like the idea of having the structure of a nonprofit and the dues is great in some capacities, and also a whole layer of things that we have to manage and take care of in other capacities that takes a lot of thought to kind of build up to. So I think it's kind of one of those things where most of the people on the FRAC now were not on the FRAC at the time that the due structure was initiated. And so, I don't know where everybody falls on it. And so I think it would be good to have, like, I think this is a good conversation to have for strategic planning, and maybe a good message to get out to the membership that, like, because of all the changes right now, we have not billed for dues. And, yes, it's probably included in your budget if you're funded through First Things First, but until we are able to come back together and do our strategic planning and figure out what that looks like, because I do think we need to update the membership about whether we're planning on billing them soon for dues, because if they were paying attention, they probably think they should have been billed for them in October, and it's December. So, but I do think it's a topic we should give some time to in our strategic planning, personally.
Okay. Oh, great.
Because, sorry, just to say one more thing, and I say that because it was voted in by the membership and approved by the membership. So it's something that I think if we're going to undo it, then we have to, like, we can't just make it disappear and preset it. I'm not saying that you guys are proposing that, but I'm just saying we don't want to let it just disappear. If it is something that we decide that we're going to not do for now, even, then I think we should announce that to the membership of like, this was approved and we're suspending it for the time being until we can get a better handle on what we really want it to look like, to make sure that it's like really meeting our strategic targets, that we're charging dues for these services, because we know everybody's budgets are stretched right now. So we're not just going to do it because we said we're going to do it until we're sure it's in alignment with what our vision is moving forward, I think, you know?
Yeah, totally fair, especially if the whole membership voted in. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Would it be possible to propose, for example, not collecting dues until First Things First does not support the network? Because First Things First is essentially paying for support for the network, including facilitation, community of practice, and professional development right now. Or is the idea to kind of build funding for the future, Kaya?
Yeah, the idea was to build it in this year and next year, so that when/if First Things First stops funding the network support in FY26, we would already have a little bit of money kind of banked, and we wouldn't have this like gap of being able to provide that support. So So I guess I would say like my gut on it would be that when we have our strategic, that we should probably send some kind of messaging out to the network, saying we understand that dues, were passed, and that we had originally said we would be billing in the fall. And part of that, I mean, really, it's not just the switch in you guys, right? It's also the switch in, there were several regions where family resource centers had to go back and redo their entire application process. So I think it makes sense either way for there to be a delay in us deciding how we're going to move forward with it. And maybe if we just send out some messaging, and maybe that's a straight from Marcella as as FRAC president or whatever, but just saying something to that effect of like, we understand you're anticipating paying these. We're working through some pieces with it to determine what the best way is to move forward with it, and we will message you as soon as we can about it, just so that people don't think that it's kind of been forgotten about.
Yeah. Okay. Marcella, would you be down to do that?
Absolutely.
Awesome. And is there any support that you need to do that?
I'll draft a message and I'm happy to share with you.
Okay. Great. Okay, sounds like a conversation for strategic planning, which is, I think, on this agenda in terms of when to bring us together to do that. Shall we move on to the rest of the agenda? Oh yes, it's also me. So for the Family Resource Center Landscape Survey. So this week I sent out to the FRAC the most final draft of this survey that was compiled by Prevent Child Abuse Arizona, First Things First, the DCS Office of Prevention, DES, and ADHS. That is another version, or it's an amplified version of a survey that happened a few years ago, which I believe that the AZFRN was also part of spreading. And we're really wanting to be more specific in terms of what we mean by family resource centers in this survey. So I have gotten some feedback, thank you, Melissa, from the language of the survey and kind of clarifications. This is not meant to be a survey that is kind of necessarily tied to anything in the future. It's really a landscape analysis to see, okay, how many FRCs are there really? Because there are definitely some that are not in the network that we know of exist, but may not call themselves an FRC, but definitely meet the criteria to be an FRC. We want them to be in the fold because they're really an FRC. And also the survey asks, opportunities for expansion. So if FRCs, for example, only have First Things First funding and they only serve the birth to 5 population, but they would be interested in serving older ages of children or offering that programming if they had the resources, we want to know that because that's good information that we could bring to funders and say, look, there is this desire, this need to expand the scope of what FRCs offer. So that's the information that we're working to gather in the survey. Any questions about that? Okay. And really the point of the other group, which is that collective of organizations, those systems partners, is to get a sustainable stream of resources to fund family resource centers and to connect them so that we have a family support system in Arizona. Because right now many people don't know where family resource centers are or what they are, but that strategy is really to get long-term sustained funding for the concept of FRCs beyond that of First Things First. So that's what it is. And Jennifer will be joining us on Monday, which is great. Okay, and that survey will go out next week, probably, pending everyone's approval and edits. And please fill it out for your FRCs that you lead.
Yeah, the next agenda item that kind of slid in there is also a survey, and I'm sure it's hard to wrap around like these two surveys that are happening. And so feel free to ask for clarification. But the second survey, you all reviewed the questions, and it's part of our feedback cycle to First Things First, but hopefully it's also utilized by us. So we have those results. It closed on Wednesday, 36 respondents. And I've been looking at the data this week and identifying key themes. One of the themes happens to be that statewide advocacy and knowing that the FRCs themselves are bolstered with funding, and also an appreciation for the strategy of an FRC and feeling like there's room for expansion. And that came up when we were talking about the FRN and something that they'd like to either feel or talk about. I realize that there's so much on our plates as the FRN of like the sustainability of this network and all that it offers, and then the sustainability or the advocacy of the field. And so that's why these two groups are kind of happening, and your interest in participation is encouraged, though not required, as you're also kind of managing the sustainability of the AZRFN. So that's just a side note. We wanted to hear from you, like the best way to share these survey results. So Michelle was going to create like a PowerPoint presentation that showcases the key themes. But just like any data, there might be one comment that is notable and necessary to recognize and consider, but it might not be the perspective of all. And so we'll also include all of the raw data for you. It is anonymous, and so you can review each comment one by one, but to assist in that review, we'll identify those themes. So we're probably going to have the analysis done before December. We're not meeting again in December. So would you like us to wait to share it until we can meet in January? Or would you like us to just send both the raw data and the report for you to have a chance to review? What would you prefer?
I would like the review period just to read through it and be able to kind of digest it maybe, and then when we come together, have some good conversation topics or points.
It's also our goal to make sure that you have a chance to review it before we send to First Things First.
Yeah, I think if I'm understanding right, does that mean that you would, if we review it before you'd send us all the information, and then we would review it as a FRAC at our next FRAC meeting, or the next one after the information is compiled, whatever that is, and then it would be presented to the network as a whole in February when we have that meeting? Okay. Yeah,
Yes.
I think that makes sense.
Great. And I don't know if you have to present it to the network as a whole. You certainly can, or make it available to them. But so far, I think it's been really guiding for the leadership, for you all to select like, oh, what is important to people? You're probably familiar with the questions, but it's like, what do people see as the purpose of the AZFRN? What is critical to maintain? What do they appreciate most? And then recommendations, of course, in that there's like topics for PD that come up naturally, or suggestions to modify things. And so that's really most informative to you as a leadership. Great. Well, Michelle and I will wrap that up. We'll email you a report in addition to all the raw data, and we're here if you have any questions about it. And just know that once it's in your hands, it's not going anywhere else. So there's room for discussion. And then ultimately, we'd like it to end up in First Things First hands once it has your approval. Thank
Which also to that end, my assumption, Molly, and I think this will make sense given the timeline of the next meeting, but I assumed we would be ready to send it to FTF by the end of January, because my assumption was we would need to have it finalized in order to share to the network in our February 8th meeting. So if that timing works out, I think that makes sense. Okay. Okay, yes. Sorry, Mal, there was like a couple times when my brain just like blanked out when you were talking. So if I didn't accurately capture it, let me know and I'll add things in. Okay, so I do have a community of practice update to share with you all. If you might remember from our meeting back in October that one of the 3 components essentially of this contract is developing a community practice in coordination with FTF. And there's been some discussion about like what that means. And at this point, I can share that we have proposed, and I think it's a go, that we would like this community practice to be happen monthly, but those sessions alternate between a session focused on the national quality standards and led by one of the national quality standards trainers, and then a separate session focused on FTF standards of practice. And it sounds like that's what we're going to do moving forward. Briefly, I explored with Molly Kemp the idea of potentially taking FRC connections at existing space and using and turning that into sort of a more robust community of practice. That is not going to work, but regardless, Molly Kemp is on board with leading FRC connections given Sarah Fox's exit. And I am excited to provide some coordination and design support to make sort of like lessen the burden of having to run that, and also make it a really useful space that people have, you know, they learn a lot, they connect, they want to come back. So I wanted to share both of those things, and also just, you know, give you space to share anything I should know or questions or anything like that.
I do have a question. Also, I have to say, if I'm giving you weird faces, I apologize. I have 2 monitors and I got a new one. And so one of them doesn't match the other one anymore. And looking back and forth between them is like giving me major headaches this week until my eyes adjust to it. So apologies if I'm giving any of you weird looks. Is there a definition from First Things First of like what they're considering success in terms of developing a community of practice?
No. The vibe from what I gathered from our conversations, and it could just be semantics. I'm trying not to fall into a semantics hole, which I'm prone to. But when I think of community practice, I think a lot about the community part of that. You know, so peer-led learning and opportunity for connection. I think First Things First is much more focused on the practice part of it. So really like implementation guidance, or what I would consider to be technical assistance, essentially. That's what I think is most important to them. And so I think they really want a space to focus in on specific standards of practice from the First Things First handbook that seem to be in need of support based on what FRC submit to them in their data collection cycles. So given that, I imagine, I'm making some wild assumptions here, but I imagine that they'll collect data, assess the data, decide, you know what, we really need to focus on these 3 standards moving forward, and then have sessions for those. And then in the next cycle's data, hopefully see progress along whatever they have identified as needing to be addressed. Claire, are there other things you would throw out there in terms of what success looks like?
Is to be determined, because I think it may be to be determined in their minds as well, to be perfectly honest. But just to reiterate, we're thinking of doing 3 things related to gathering separate from the AZFRN and FRAC meetings. So I'm going to repeat what Michelle I just said, but to me, sometimes repetition helps. So the first one is every other month, there'll be a gathering for anyone who's been certified in the quality standards, which are FRC staff, but it could also mean anyone else that is part of a family service, an entity that provides services to families who has been certified. So those are for people certified in the quality standards, and that will be open to anyone that meets that criteria. The second thing on the alternate months will be just for FTF funded FRCs. It's kind of like a technical support, implementation support. Do you have questions for First Things First and what they want? What do you want to say to them to make it easier for you, or what support do you need from First Things First? So they'll be only for FRCs that are FTF funded. And then the third thing that will happen, and the cadence is to be determined, will be the continuation of the FRC Connections, which is entirely FRC director led and peer led, has nothing to do with First Things First requirements, and is just a space for FRCs to connect to one another. So those are the three things that we're proposing. But to answer your question again, Katie, we are not actually entirely clear, but they have articulated that they want a space to be able to clearly answer implementation questions that they get from FRCs that they fund.
Yeah. And at least with FRC, oh, I'm sorry, Katie, I just cut you off.
No, you're good. I appreciate it. I think it's not you guys, it's the terminology of community of practice. Like whenever I read terms like that, I'm always like, what does that
Mean.
like, what does that actually mean to anybody? Because aren't we a community of practice? And so I guess I'm curious how we can help make sure that happens, because if the goal is for you all as the contracted facilitators to make this happen, that obviously has to engage us in it. And so I just want to kind of I guess I'm trying to get my arms a little bit around more what First Things First is kind of expecting and considering a success in that area. So it sounds like a lot of it's to be determined.
Yeah, and it's funny you say that, because Claire mentioned last week, she's like, can we just call it something else? I was like, yeah, that's a great idea.
It's one of those terms that you're like, does that actually mean anything? But
yeah, because to me, community of practice is like peer-to-peer. It's FRCs talking to each other about what's going on and what challenges they're facing, what successes they're having, and supporting each other through that. But what First Things First is talking about is really like office hours with them, in which you can troubleshoot things with them based on the questions that you have about your requirements. And that's the part that we're required to do in the scope of work. But the other things, the community of practice related to quality standards, that's been floated as an idea, because once you attend that training, I mean, we attended it earlier this year, it's a lot, right? And then to be expected to kind of remember all the quality standards and then just to do it is a lot. So those sessions are really designed to help people keep on thinking about how they're implementing the standards. And then the FRC Connections, that's not really part of our contract, because again, First Things First wants more of like a office hours with First Things First type situation. But Michelle, in just her conversations, feels pretty strongly that peer support is actually more important, or that is important. I want to be careful. This is a recording. And so that's why we want to continue to provide support to FRC Connections happening, because that truly is more of a community of practice in that term, peer-to-peer support.
And I just wanted to add that, like, everything that we're presenting may feel like a lot. It's coming through in the survey data too, which you'll have access to. It may just be one or two comments, but that's the concept of collaboration. Some people are desiring like more support around meeting First Things First standards. Some people are mentioning the quality standards. And then there's been a really increasing theme of, I love these connections. I want more. I want more informal connections. And so the FRC Connections is really organic to that and could be what we think of as a community of practice. And since the need is there, hopefully we're not just meeting what First Things First requires, we're serving those in our network, and sustainability is also top of mind. And that's how we'll just balance with, yep, we're meeting the needs of our those that we serve, and hopefully in doing so, we're also meeting First Things First needs. But how can we do this in a sustainable way if First Things First is no longer a funder? And even then, it's maybe creating an office hours that First Things First owns someday if they're not the contractor for this. So just some thoughts.
Yeah. And to be totally like frank about it, I guess, after upon learning about FRC Connections existing, I was like, oh yeah, this actually sounds way more in line with what I think of when I think of community practice. And when I first saw the scope of work, community practice was the thing that excited me the most about the work. so anyway, to like find out that what my vision of it wasn't actually a thing that was going to happen, I was like a little bit bummed. But then talking to Molly Kemp multiple times, and Sarah actually too, and then hearing multiple people mention, Marcella, you mentioned in your one-on-one how one of those meetings early on was really helpful to you, and it kept coming up. Leslie mentioned something similar. So anyway, I was like, you know what? There's a lot of value in that space. It should continue there now that there's an opening for it. I want to. This is the kind of work that I like to do anyway, so I'd rather spend my time making that great and supporting that. We do have a cadence established that I ran by Molly Kemp that I'll announce to the network. I am struggling a little bit about deciding like whether to contact the entire network and let them know about Sarah's departure, Molly Kemp taking the lead, and then the proposed dates. That it does make sense to inform everybody. But then there's a part of me that's like, there's a December 13th meeting that's scheduled that we are going to skip and instead survey people to get an idea of what they want to prioritize moving forward. So it feels urgent to inform anyone who is expecting to attend that meeting. It feels like maybe it's worth waiting and informing the entire group in February at our February 8th meeting so that we can provide some more context about what FRC Connections is for anyone who's new and doesn't know. But I don't know. Anyway, if anyone has a strong feeling one way or the other, let me know. Because I'm not 100% convinced one way is better than another in terms of timing, other than making sure people who were expecting to attend know that it's not happening. Okay. All right. Well, anyway, sorry. My brain is on the decline. But before we go, we have 16 minutes. So we really need to talk about the retreat. Anna let us know that there is a retreat that happens. We are jazzed about that idea. We love a good retreat. The question is, thank you, Katie. The question is, originally she mentioned that typically happens in January. So we were thinking about replacing the January FRAC meeting with a half day or a full day retreat. But then Marcella brought up the fact that we're 2 positions down on the FRAC. There's the second member at large position and then Sarah's treasurer position. So do we wait until we have a full team? And if so, will that require us to vote in February and then have a retreat in March? So I just love to open it up and hear from you all. Like, is that the way we should go? And what does that election process look like? Like, do we do voting in the AZFRN meeting in February? And nominations, I guess, are part of that. I don't know what that process has been in the past, but
yeah, and I don't know, I'm not sure because Marcella's camera's off if she had to, oh, there she is. Okay. I didn't know if you had to step away. Do you want to respond to that?
Oh, sorry, I had to take an HR call, so I didn't catch it. I'm so sorry. I'm only
that's okay.
myself today. Ask me again, or if it's a
Yeah, absolutely. It was you already know some of it. It was me just sharing with the group that Anna mentioned that FRAC typically retreats in January, but you mentioned it might be worthwhile to wait until we have a full team. So my question was, do we want to wait until the team is full, and how do we fill the team? How do we nominate, and like what typically does that voting process look like? Will we vote in February for those 2 positions, and then if we do that, do we plan on retreating together in March as a FRAC?
Yeah, I think in the conversation it was kind of a, if we wait too long, it's a little too late in March. I mean, it feels like it's farther out. But I will at least speak for what my process is. There were nominations. I connected with someone who was already part, and then my name was shared with our FRAC members, and then I was voted into a meeting, if I'm correct, Katie. So I know in our last meeting, I reached out to Yenny because Yenny Rios from Buckeye was interested, and she's on board. But again, that would be a nomination, and then we would vote at our February meeting. So with that said, ultimately, if we did the retreat, we could do it in January. She just wouldn't be officially voted in.
Yeah.
And I agree with Anna's sentiment, right? March does seem a little too far out. So I would say January is the best time. I don't know what the policy or if there is any around inviting Yenny to the retreat. That would give her kind of a taste and opportunity, and then put her through the voting in February. I think the sooner is the better, the best that we can do. And then we do have 2 open positions. So we have Sarah and a member at large.
Yeah, and actually, Marcella, so, and I was double checking because we reviewed this, I think, when we went over the bylaws, the last time. But because the vacancy in, Sarah's position happened after the year had already started, actually you as chair can just fill her.
Oh, perfect.
You don't have to, it doesn't have to go to a vote. You can fill her seat without it having to go to a vote. I think like that's how it's written in the bylaws. I want to say in the past, there's probably been a conversation where, you know, whoever is making that nomination is kind of going to the FRAC as a whole and saying, this is who I'm planning on bringing forward if nobody has any objections, but I don't think anybody ever has. So I think that if Yenny is comfortable with it and you're comfortable and she is willing to take that spot, you know, we could, it is quick for her. You know, but I mean, I don't think there's any harm in having her come to strategic planning, even if she's like brand new and feels like when I started on the FRAC, I literally started and like 2 weeks later was a strategic planning. And so I mainly just soaked it in and listened at that meeting. And I think it was beneficial. So I think if you're comfortable with that and you think she's comfortable, I think we're okay to move forward because it doesn't require, you literally just have to appoint the person. So you could appoint them, you know, without having to go to vote.
That's cool.
Yeah. And I think we did that so it doesn't end up delayed because, you know, if we weren't able to get everybody together on the FRAC for months and months, we might have a vacant position. So
Yeah. Okay, so is the preferred route, we bring Yenny on to replace Sarah as treasurer, assuming no one on the FRAC has objections, and that we just need to hear from Anna and Jennifer. And then we do move forward with the January retreat. So replace our current FRAC meeting, which is currently set for
The 10th.
the 10th at 2:30. Yeah. Okay, so we would need to decide, do we want to make that full day, half day? Marcella shared last year it was 9:30 to 2:30. Do you all have preferences about like noon to 4 or keep 9:30 to 2:30? What do you think would make sense for this group?
I think that we would want to decide whether we're planning on doing it in person or virtual. Because especially with Jennifer being in, you know, Southern Arizona, if we're doing in person, we would want to, did I say in personal? I think I did, I'm sorry. It's Friday. If we're doing it in person, we would probably want to talk to Jennifer about like timing of that and whether she's able to do that. If we're doing it virtual, I don't necessarily have a strong preference, although I do feel like people kind of drop off towards the end of the day and we might have better luck if it's kind of earlier, not early, but earlier.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the preference is for in person, if I'm not mistaken. And you're right, we need to coordinate with Jennifer. Okay, so I can reach out to her and ask her what the timing would look like. We also, well, we would need to find space. So that matters a lot before she can decide.
We could find space. Well,
Yeah.
I don't think it's gonna be a problem.
Okay.
We would be able to pay for a hotel room, if needed, and possibly mileage if she's in need of that too.
Okay, would we, Claire, do you think everyone else is in Maricopa County? Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that right?
I think so.
Okay. Okay. Okay, great. So we have 8 minutes left. What must we include in the February 8th AZFRN meeting? I know in the past it's been some updates from, you know, various committees and such. But it sounds like at this point, it's just the PD committee and the marketing committee. I don't think the sustainability committee is still operational, but I could be wrong about that. Do you guys know? No. Okay.
I don't think it is. I think it kind of went by a little bit I think it was what's the word I'm looking for, ad hoc, like really during the time they were discovering, like talking about dues and all that. So
So we'll need some space for whatever updates do exist. We also, in talking to the professional development committee, we let them know that we have funding to host a full day conference for FRC staff members or AZFRN members, which we'd originally proposed to either tacking onto the PCA conference before or after, but it sounds like July is not great timing. So, I think I mentioned this last meeting. So we're looking at an August date. Anyway, we want to, at that February 8th meeting, put out a call for people to join a planning committee so that we can have members informing what that conference looks like. There was a keynote speaker suggestion thrown out by the PD committee, who we've contacted and haven't heard back yet from, but there's still room to decide, what those workshops look like and all of that. So we will make a call for that.
And Michelle, I think one of our ideas was at the February meeting, we'd actually poll people between a couple of options, because
Yes.
it would be, I think it would be great to tack it on to the Prevent Child Abuse Arizona conference, so that if people are already attending that, they could just stay an extra day for travel, especially if they're out of town. But if that really doesn't work, we would want to find a venue that might be able to hold, let's say, 100+ people, so that we could kind of save a date for August. So let's find dates in August that might be available at, let's say, that the Renaissance and perhaps another venue, and poll people during the meeting.
Yeah.
How does that sound to the FRAC leaders? Like, determining which would be the best option for dates.
Yeah, I think that works. I mean, I think in general, so I think that the hesitation in the past was summer months, well, partly because some people don't really, like, there are sites that aren't necessarily available all summer or whatever, but also I think the hesitation was that if people have to renew contracts next year, or I don't think anybody's in the beginning of a new cycle next year, but the potential uncertainty of whether, like, if people are going to get their funding for the next year. But I don't know if that's actually an issue with First Things First for next year, because I think everybody's on the same cycle for the FRCs now, I think.
We can
Which
have
case
that
it's really
confirmed. We can confirm that with First Things First. If that's the
Okay,
case, do you think it'd be easier to have it in July, potentially?
I mean, I think any time of year you choose, there's going to be some people who are going to have conflicts with it.
Yeah.
So I feel like if it's more cost effective and for you guys, and also, but also for potentially people who, if you have a lot of FRN like members who come to your conference, if it seems like you could tack on an additional day and that would be easier for them, I think it's just as likely you'll get, people who are unavailable in July as it is in almost any other month. Because, like, for us, July tends to be pretty quiet, but for some people, they're not available for stuff. Versus, like, if you plan something in November or December, I'm virtually unavailable most of the time, because it's just, we have so much holiday stuff happening here. So I think you're going to run into it no matter what. So maybe just poll and see what the preferred, like, give a couple of different time frames.
Okay, great.
I think that's a good idea. And Michelle, to your point of the next meeting, I cannot remember if we shared this in the past or if you have your own version of it. But we did have kind of a standard like meeting agenda format that we typically followed that I can send if you don't have. I don't remember if you have it or not.
The one I have, I only have one, and it's from September.
October?
Or, oh, wait, no, wait, I have two. I have the one you sent, I have the one I attended in October, and then
Okay.
the whatever meeting happened prior to that.
Yeah, so that's usually the one that we've kind of followed in the past, and it's basically like, obviously some stuff won't transition of officers won't apply in the next meeting. Although maybe introduction of new officers replacing, vacant seats is a good thing to cover. But like that, the meeting minutes, we always have time for a First Things First update, for a facilitator update, for treasurer's report, which I don't know if we'll have one.
Yeah.
For February. So that might be something to think about. Committee updates, National Family Support Network, which, I don't know if that's something that will be covered separately or if that kind of will get wrapped in now. And
Katie,
then any other business.
Sorry, Katie, can I ask who typically would do the NFSN stuff?
It was usually Molly Bailey from First Things First.
Oh, okay. And
Yeah,
would she do that
she
and
was-
FTF updates?
The FTF update depended on who they sent. It was for a long time. It was Annette who was coming to our meetings and
okay.
giving those for the most part, either her or Molly. But my understanding is it won't be Annette anymore because of her new position. So I think Molly and Kat were the two that we were told would be kind of the point people for engagement with the AZFRN. So I would assume it would be one of them. And typically, what would happen is the consultants would reach out to them before the meeting and say, you know, we have time on the agenda. Can you tell us how much you need? And then they would come. And a lot of, you know, sometimes they have stuff to talk about, sometimes they really don't. Depends on what's going on and where they are in their grant cycles largely. But that's kind of how that was handled. And then usually like the committee updates were given by whoever's kind of the lead of that committee.
Cool. And I think it is Molly Bailey and Kendra Smiley now.
Oh,
And-
is it Kendra? Okay.
Yeah, and actually, do they typically come to FRAC meetings as well?
So that's a good question. I feel like in the past we did have Annette and sometimes Molly at FRAC meetings. I can't remember if they were at all of them.
I
But
don't
believe
remember
I
seeing
feel
them
like
all
we,
of them, maybe. I do remember seeing them at the retreat that Molly joined, right?
right. Yeah, I feel like, and I'm not, and I'm going to be really honest with you, Claire. I don't know if they, because I think they were at most of the FRAC meetings, if not all. I don't know if that's because CAC wanted them to be there, or if First Things First said we need to be there. Like, I'm not really sure how that
Yeah.
works. So I don't know if there's a requirement or an expectation from First Things First staff that they be included. None of us ever really had a problem with it because, you know, what we were talking about was good for them to know and vice versa. And a lot of times, like the First Things First staff could maybe give us a little more insight into things going on that they couldn't necessarily give everybody.
Yeah.
And so at least we sort of knew. So it was helpful in that way, I think, for them to participate if they're available to.
Okay, wonderful. So we will invite them if that's all right with everyone here. Okay. Just
I
wanted
think
to make
so,
sure.
yeah.
Great.
Okay.
And
Okay.
including the retreat.
Yeah, they were
Okay.
there at the retreat. Yeah. And the other thing that I, you know, and this is just my take on it as the past chair, and I'll, you know, obviously Marcella maybe has a different view on it, but you know, I think us kind of building the agenda for the AZFRN meetings together with you guys is really helpful too, because I know like when I would first join the FRAC, there were times I'd show up to the meetings and like not really necessarily having any idea what was going to be on the agenda for it. So just a thought of like if we can maybe coordinate that together, or even if it's just you guys with Marcella coordinating it, what the agenda will include.
Awesome, Katie. And I know that we're running out of time, but there are a few things that I think we've been talking about in the past few months that could be added to the agenda, including updates on the communities of practices, like the various things that will be offered. Potential upcoming professional development opportunities that are outside of the AZFRN days, and that potential conference. So I think there's going to be a whole bunch of updates. And I think it would be helpful. I think it would be cool to show the AZFRN the results of the AZFRN survey about what they find valuable. I think that might be just a good thing to feed back to them. So we could add that to the agenda too.
Yeah.
Regardless, we'll draft an agenda and send it out to FRAC for edits and additions.
Yes. Okay. Yes. I can't remember what I was going to say. Must not be that important, but I will send the link to this. It's also saved in our shared Google Drive space, but also the recording. I will make sure that gets added to that folder so that anyone who missed parts of this will get clued in. And we'll also follow up with Jennifer to inquire about that retreat, which is potentially a month away, if we can make it happen, which I think we should be able to. And then Marcella, will you let Yenny know that we would love to have her, and we can just make sure will you communicate with the rest of FRAC? So just Anna and Jennifer to make sure they're good with it.
So
And if
Marcella,
Yeah.
I think she had to jump off.
Oh,
We'll let her
okay.
know though. We can follow
Yeah.
up with her.
Okay, cool. And yeah, I can't imagine it being a problem. Okay, great. That sounds great. Thank you guys. Oh, there it is. I'll draft an email and share on Monday. Beautiful. Okay. Well, that's it for me. Anything else for the good of the order? Okay. Well, I hope you have a lovely weekend.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you all. Good to see you.
Yes, you too. Take care.
Okay. Hi.
Recording?
Oh.